Welcome to Melrose Unitarian Universalist Church. Our service today is called Indigenous Americans, Myths, Truths, and Our Inheritance. So, good morning. I'm the Reverend Dr. Suzanne Intriligator. My pronouns are she and hers, and I'm the minister of this congregation. It's good to see you all here this morning on such a beautiful day. And hello to our friends at home joining us by Zoom. Ours is a church of open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands, and everyone who shares our values is welcome to be here among us. It is, as usual, kind of a mixed feeling day. For many of us, it's a 3-day weekend, and maybe some folks are away today. Yay, hooray! That's more time to sleep in and time to spend with family and doing things we love, so that's a joy, and it's good to share. At the same time, the reason for the holiday, even the name of the holiday, illustrates this place we are at as a transition in society. You know, it's kind of a turning point, a tricky moment. 2 years ago, the city of Melrose changed the name from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, but the state of Massachusetts has yet to do that, even though 17 other states have. So, a moment of transition. Many of us also bring here today concerns about recent developments in Israel and Palestine, and our hearts are heavy. We come together fittingly to pray, to meditate, to share with one another our sorrows and our joys, to renew both our hope for peace and our resolve to work for the justice on which it must be based. Our theme in worship and RE this month is heritage, and today we revisit the history of this land where our building stands, and the people who cultivated this land for thousands of years before we got here. What is our inheritance from these people, and what is our responsibility toward them? I want to thank all the people who helped make the worship possible. Our helpers today are our usher, Garen Boyd, our greeter, Nancy Nichols, and the coffee hosts, who are Janice and Don Bissix. Thank you very much for helping this morning. We have just a couple of brief reminders. A few weeks ago, I preached about climate change in my work with Extinction Rebellion, and there is a book that I quoted on and based a lot of that sermon. We've got free copies in the library. Please pick up yours, and we'll have a book discussion about it later in the month. Also, the worship committee is looking for new members. They meet on Wednesday. Feel free to join in. And there are 2 new covenant groups that are starting this month, one on Thursdays and one on Sundays. More information about that is in your midweek update. Also, we've got an interesting class coming up on the spirituality of death and dying, and it will be led by our own Jay Libby. That starts later on in October. More information about that in the newsletter. And then one more brief announcement from our own Dan Griscom. Dan, please come up.
Good morning. This church has lots of services and committees and meetings and potlucks and fundraisers, but you know where the real business of the church happens: coffee hour. This year it's good to have a plant in the audience. This year I'm organizing coffee hour. We have a group of volunteers who host 2 each Sunday. They tell me their availability, and I schedule Sundays out a few months ahead of time. Hosting is easy. Felicia, our office manager, provides all the food and staples, and all you have to do is show up, make the coffee, set up the goodies, and serve after the service. Right now, hosts serve about 3 times a year, but a few more volunteers would mean we'd only have to host twice a year. Plus, it's always nice to get new blood supporting this critical function of the church. So if you can join the group, or if you have any suggestions, you know where you can find me. Thank you.
Coffee hour. Thank you, Dan. So now is the moment where we greet one another every week. You know, turn around, wave, say hi, give out hugs and handshakes. Don't forget our folks on Zoom. Good morning, Zoomies. Hi, you're all looking good this morning. I think you've had more coffee than me. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Now that is a happy dance. Thank you. So now it's time to start our worship. I call us to worship this morning with these words from Nancy Bright Sky Harris, who is a contemporary leader and singer and dancer among the Nipmuc people of Massachusetts. She writes, "Grandmother Earth, grandfather Sky, hear your people, calling in their prayers, in their dreams for direction. We want to see a new sunset, a new beginning for our children and of the next 7 generations to come. Guide us to the right path and let our moccasins follow in your steps. Aho." Now we light the symbol of our faith, the flaming chalice. Here to light it for us this morning is board member and clerk of the board, Gretchen Locke.
Good morning. I invite you now to rise in body or in spirit and to join me in the words of our covenant, which are on the screen behind me. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for its truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. This is our great covenant, one with another and with our God.
Please remain standing and join in our opening hymn led by our choir today. Thank you so much. It's number 187 in the gray hymnal. Lyrics will appear on the screen, so you don't need to dig it out. It Sounds Along the Ages, a good old-fashioned hymn about heritage. And Tom will lead us. Thanks, Tom. It sounds along the ages, soul answering to soul. It kindles on the pages of every Bible scroll. The psalmist heard and sang it, from martyr lips it broke, and prophet tongues outrang it, till sleeping nations woke. From Sinai's piercing echo, it breathes on the stream. It shines in heaven's darkened, with hallowed heavenly. The embers of the earth, the pilgrims cease like prayer. Thank you. Please be seated. Our story today is the Song of Creation, from Children of the Morning Light, Wampanoag Tales as told by Manitonquat Medicine Story. There was only one drawing in the book, so I've added some photos here to illustrate. We are known as the people of the dawn, the Wampanoag, children of the morning light. This is a story we have of the beginning of things. At first, there was nothing. Only Cayetan was there, our people say, the great mystery, whose name is also Kishtanet, the Big Spirit. There, in the nothing, Cayetan began to sing, and there was joy in his song. Time began. The song was the song of creation, and the singer, Cayetan, sang up time, and then sang up space, and then sang up movement to dance through the space. Pretty soon, Cayetan, the creator, thought it would be good to have something to dance with. So, from the energy around him, he began to sing up some substance. Then Cayetan sang up some star makers to go and gather together the clouds of this mass. They brought these clouds together so tightly that they became hot and began to burn. Here and there in the far distances of space, fires began to burn in the dark, and these became the stars. Then the star makers got together in star nations, star tribes, star clans, and star families. We can see some of them now at night wandering on their sacred roads through the heavens, still dancing in circles. Cayetan, the creator, saw that all the star makers had different thoughts. He thought that was good, for now the new universe would have many kinds of ideas. All possible thoughts would be available for the song of creation. One of the star makers we call Hobo Mako. He thought that everything was wrong. He thought that Cayetan, the creator, was making mistakes everywhere. He tried to warn all the other star makers and tell them how bad everything was, but they did not think that way, of course, so they did not believe him. This Hobo Moko is the one who made the fire we call our sun, Nepashet. Today we call Nepashet grandfather because he is elder to all our relatives here. But in that early morning of creation when he was young, he was all alone because the other starfires were so far away, and he danced all by himself, and he sang his song all alone. After a while, Nepashet heard another song, a pretty song coming from somewhere below him. He looked down and he saw two lovely sisters dancing together and singing so sweetly. These sisters were Nanny Pashet and Pompagosset, spirits of the moon and the ocean. We call them grandmother today, but at the time they were very young and very beautiful, and they had only each other. Pompagosset was dark and mysterious, and her dance rose and fell in a turbulent rhythm. Nanny Pashet was bright and serene, and her dance moved slowly around her sister. There was joy and much love in the song they sang and the dance they danced together. When Grandfather Sun saw the dance and heard the song of these sisters, he began to love them. He was glad not to be alone, and he did not want them to leave. So he said to them, "Sisters, I would like you to stay with me. Perhaps one of you would marry me, but I cannot choose between you because you are both so beautiful." And the sisters answered, "We like you well enough, but we love each other so much that we cannot be parted from one another. Therefore, if you will marry both of us, we will stay and be your wives." And so Grandmother Ocean came gladly to live in the lodge of Grandfather Sun, and with her, shyly and silently, also came Grandmother Moon. The two sisters lived and danced and sang around the warm fire of Grandfather Sun, and they loved him each in their own way. And so they sing and dance together, the dance of grandmothers, even still to this day. Nanny Pashet, the moon, bathed in the Nepashet, the sun, and gave it back, all that energy to the dancing waves of Pompagosset, the ocean. But Pompagosset drew Nepashet's powerful light into her and kept it. The energy of Neposet sang in the depths of the ocean, and seeds began to grow there. From this song, Kisaquit, the sky was conceived and born. Father Sky embraced his mother and reached toward his father. And then Metaoki, Mother Earth, was conceived and began to grow deep in the womb of Grandmother Ocean. This is how the world began, according to the Wampanoag people. Thank you for your good listening. You can now go downstairs to your RE classes. I hope you have a good time. Every Sunday in the middle of our service, we take time for quiet. A moment for prayer and meditation, a time for each of us to reconnect with our inner selves, our highest ideals, our own ideal of what is holy. Let's begin this time together by closing our eyes and settling into our seats, relaxing our bodies, feeling our feet on the floor, breathing deeply in and out. In our meditation time, first we'll join in our centering song, then we'll sit for a few minutes of shared quiet, then we'll speak to one another of our joys and sorrows, then I will lead a prayer. Our centering song for this month on heritage is We Are Not Our Own, verses 1 and 2. It's number 317 in the gray hymnal, but lyrics will appear here. Remain seated, join in as you like, and let the song gently guide you into our time of shared quiet.
Which
It is our tradition here to speak to one another of our joys and sorrows, the milestones of our lives. We share with one another from the heart, and this sharing knits us closer as a community. I invite anyone who has a sorrow to share to please come forward today and speak from the microphone so everyone can hear you and see you. People on Zoom can type any sorrows you want to share into the chat box, and I will read them aloud. I don't see any sorrows to share, but I do want to take a moment and hold in our hearts the people of Israel and Palestine, Gaza and the West Bank, all of the people who are suffering and scared. I don't know about a way forward, but I know that our care and our love makes a difference. Garen, if you would go ahead and light a candle for all the sorrows that were spoken and unspoken this morning, everything that remains in our hearts. Let the candle be a reminder to us to reach out to all the people in our lives who may be hurting and treat them with kindness and care. I want to invite anyone who has a joy to share with us today to come forward. Speak from the mic. People in our Zoom room, go ahead and you can type it into the chat box if you like. I did turn it on, yep.
Morning, my name's Mary Delahanty. I have a candle of joy. We had a wonderful team of people cooking our Bread of Life meal on Friday. Usually we aim for about 125 meals. This week we heard that the Malden Bread of Life program is seeing more people who are hungry. And there was one day this past week they gave out 200 meals. So there's enough food insecurity out there, and one of the things that is increasing the need is that they're seeing a lot of immigrants in that community. So what we do in this church is really important by providing a cooked meal that goes to many of the hungry people. And if anybody's interested in helping us out, we'd love to have you. We just do 8 meals a year, alternating between Thursdays and Fridays. So you can see me or Martha Borkin. We're kind of the lead chefs, we call ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Don Bissix, and I'm happy to announce that the men's retreat has settled on a location, and we're going to Craigville, which many of you know. So we'll be going in early April. So stay tuned for more information. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chuck Foley. We always have candles of sorrow or joy, and I'm reflecting on what Reverend Suzanne mentioned at the outset of mixed feelings sometimes. So this is a candle of ambivalence, but I think primarily joy. So for quite a while during this year, I've been seeing retirement on my horizon. And the end of last week, my company made my job redundant. So that gives me a lot to think about in terms of how I might make this transition. And I'm really, at this point, I'm not feeling stressed about it at all, and I'm really seeing a lot of things to look forward to and just sort of engage in lots of different ways. So.
Wow.
Hi, my name is Margaret Eads. My husband and I have recently purchased a small condo here. We actually live in Richmond, but we did this to be near our daughter and her family periodically. And Tuesday night, as my 10-year-old grandson was walking me home, he saw his first shooting star. And I was like, oh, that's why we're doing this.
Oh, that's a beautiful joy. Thank you, Margaret. Garen, if you'd go ahead and light a candle. Don't see any joys in our Zoom room, so we'll light a candle for all the joys, both spoken and unspoken. And we light a candle as a reminder for all of us to feel and express the gratitude we have for all the many blessings in our lives. Thank you, Garen. Please would you join me in the spirit of prayer. I have a prayer written by the Reverend Jude Geiger, who currently serves Community Church in New York City. He writes, Spirit of life, God of many names, source of hope, we come together at the end of another week, some worn down by struggles of health, of home or work. May we be a community that makes space for the sharing of joys and sorrows, angers and hopes with grace and forbearance. In our nation's life, we pause this holiday weekend to remember the Native American lives lost from the European colonization on what is now our soil. Teach us to remember our history. Though we cannot make amends for what has come before, may we learn from those ways, never to repeat them in our lives today. May we develop new ways of relating to neighbor and stranger without violence or coercion, deceit or greed. Mother of Grace, help us to find a sense of humility where we have privilege, and strength where we face oppression. In our struggles, may we learn compassion, and in our power, may we learn temperance. As a community of faith, may we be safe harbor in a world that is often harsh toward difference. Challenge us to use our presence as a healing force for justice and equity, knowing that although we have come far in the civil rights struggles of our times, there are many people still left behind, and the work of building the beloved community is just as pressing as ever before. Amen.
Now is the time for our offertory. Our church is a self-supporting organization funded by your generous annual pledge. You may also contribute to our weekly collection plate, which we split every month with a deserving cause. Folks on Zoom can donate either way using the orange button at the top right corner of our homepage at melroseuu.org. For the month of October, at the request of our recently rebooted fellowship committee, this church will be giving half our collection plate to a social enterprise called More Than Words. With an online store for books and gifts and 2 brick-and-mortar locations, More Than Words provides support and paying jobs to Boston area young people who have been involved in the court and foster systems. We hope that More Than Words will offer a pop-up shop here at December's Alternative Fair. For today's offertory selection, we're going to sing National Anthem, Arise, Arise by Jean Roja.
Sustains us all to cherish
A middle-aged woman sits by the shore of L Pond, weeping. Her losses weigh on her, so heavy we can scarcely imagine. Her husband has died violently, and 2 of her 3 adult sons have also perished, taken by the same mysterious illness that has claimed most of her family and friends. And now her enemies surround her, threatening to take what little she has left. What will she do? How will she survive? The year was 1637, and this woman was the Queen of Massachusetts. Though her actual personal name is lost to us now, she was known, according to local customs of respect, only by her title, Squaw Sachem of the Mystic, literally woman chief. This is an image of her as imagined in recent years by a sculptor, part of a statue that now stands in the town of Arlington. These days, whenever we retell the story of this woman, we need to acknowledge that the word squaw has been used as a term of abuse to harm Native women. But in Squaw Sachem's own day, it had not taken on that pejorative meaning yet, and still today the Massachusetts people prefer that we refer to her by that name, Squaw Sachem. Her husband was Nanny Pashmet, a great leader who had consolidated, I think for the first time perhaps, all of the tribes in this area, and therefore he had claim to all of the land from what is Marblehead now to all the way to Concord. But Nanny Pashmet had died in battle around 1619. So Squaw Sachem took his place as chief and led her people for 20 years. But by 1637, their thousands had dwindled to fewer than 40, killed mostly by disease, either smallpox or leptospirosis, still not sure, while the English settlers grew more and more. Now the English wanted to take it all. They wanted to make a deal with her that was clearly unfair, but she had no choice. What would she do? If you grew up in this country the way I did, you were probably raised with many myths about Native people. We were taught that Native people were few in number and spread far apart, living like nomads in this vast wilderness, uncivilized, they were called, even savages. And so they needed to be saved by Europeans who came to settle this country, ancestors to many of us here today, who discovered this land and claimed it for their Christian God. Those settlers were supposedly guided by a covenant with this God, a manifest destiny to build here a nation spread coast to coast. That, at least, is the myth. But what is the truth? For 2 years now, as I said, the city of Melrose has celebrated officially Indigenous Peoples Day. Perhaps it was only a small change, a symbolic one maybe, but still it is a step forward, part of a larger movement toward telling the truth about this history, and maybe someday reconciliation and repair, which was the topic of last week's sermon. In that rubric, we as a nation are only at the very beginning of this journey, starting to acknowledge the truth about our history on a wide scale, initiating cultural conversations that may lead us to justice and equity in our relationships. At this auspicious time, it's a perfect moment, I think, to re-examine the myths that we were taught and uncover the truths that they were meant to hide. So let's look at some of those myths. First and most basic, let's think about the land. What did those first English settlers find when they arrived here in this place? Was it, as we were taught, a wilderness, sparsely populated, a brand new world? No, of course it was not. In 2019, our UUA Common Read was an award-winning book called An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, who is a part Indian woman and a professor at Cal State. In her chapter 1, Dunbar Ortiz shares some modern scholarship that shows that the domestication of plants took place around the world at roughly the same time, about 8,500 years before BC. Humans developed agriculture in 7 different places, including 3 places here in the supposedly New World, the Andes in South America, the Central Valley of Mexico, and here in eastern North America. People have been settled here, farming here in this place, as long as they have been farming anywhere on Earth. Native civilizations are as old as all civilizations. There is no new world. In addition, people here have been trading corn throughout the Western Hemisphere for perhaps 9,000 years now. They've developed trade routes that crisscrossed all the continents in the Western Hemisphere. And how many people were there? How many were here when the first Europeans came? Of course, it's really difficult to say, but Dunbar Ortiz looks through all the scholarship, and she puts the population of the Western Hemisphere in the 15th century at around 100 million, with perhaps 40 million people in North America. 40 million. At the same time, the population of all of Europe, from Spain to what is now Russia, was about 50 million. So roughly the same population on land masses of a roughly similar size. So in the 15th century, before the landing of Columbus, North America was as populated as Europe. That seems counter to what at least I was taught. And was it a wilderness? Was this place a wilderness that they came to? No. In this area, 17th century English writers frequently commented that the place they came to, or had become a couple hundred years before, was a curated park-like environment. Park-like. Because up and down the East Coast, native peoples had cultivated the land. The Massachusetts people practiced controlled burning and clearing of the undergrowth to create open fields where they could plant crops. They did not domesticate cattle, but they actively managed the wildlife. For example, by burning the undergrowth, they created deer parks. They were open fields where deer would come to nibble on the new plants, and they could be easily hunted. The indigenous people of the Northeast were not nomads. They were farmers and herders. They lived in established settlements connected by roads and paths in a complex network. They practiced surgery, dentistry, herbal medicine. They cooperated and had forms of government, and when conflicts broke out, they engaged in ritualized warfare that resulted in relatively few casualties. For example, the native nations of what is now Upper New York State formed an alliance called the Iroquois Confederacy. To govern it, they developed a form of participatory democracy. And this fact was known to the English settlers who lived nearby for a time. In fact, Benjamin Franklin himself printed copies of the documents of the Iroquois Confederacy, and he used those documents as an inspiration for the U.S. Constitution. Known today as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, this democratic system dates back to the year 1142, and it is documented as the oldest living participatory democracy on Earth. So, uncivilized? No. Savages? No. In fact, it's documented now that it was the English who became the first American settlers, at least in this area, who started and escalated the violence here. They brought with them brutal attitudes and practices like scalping that they had invented to subjugate the Irish just a few decades before. So let's go back to Squaw Sachem, who was alone in her grief in 1637. What were her choices? Under duress, her eldest son had already given away Charlestown, and she had already traded the huge tracts of land that would become the town of Concord in return for food. Now the English came back asking for more, and with them came a man named Edward Gibbons. Gibbons had served in the local militia, who had led the charge just a few months before on a village of Pequot Indians near what is now Mystic, Connecticut. There they committed atrocities on hundreds of people of all ages and genders, and they burned the village to the ground. The very few native survivors were captured and sold away as slaves. So most likely, Squaw Sachem knew who Gibbons was and what he had done. And she knew the kind of warfare that he practiced, and she could guess at what they intended for her and her people. She clearly felt that she had no choice. On August 1st, 1637, Squaw Sachem signed a document that in exchange for 21 coats, some wampum, 3 bushels of corn, deeded all of her remaining land, including what would become Watertown, Cambridge, Malden, and Melrose, to a group of Englishmen, among them Edward Gibbons. A year later, in 1638, a small parcel of that land pops up in a record of Charlestown land holdings. According to local historian James Bennett, who's alive now, many of you know him, that record describes the property belonging to one Richard Sprague in this way, quote, 60 acres of land by estimation, more or less, situate in Pond Field, bounded on one side by Ralph Sprague, on the northeast by L Pond and the river that comes through the meadow into L Pond, and on the northwest by the Common, unquote. Based on that description, Bennett contends that this parcel of land is the very same one on which this building stands. We have a map, there we go. So this is Jim Bennett's estimate of Pond Field, the 60 acres that comes up, 60, in the year 1638, belonging to Richard Sprague. And you can see that's Emerson Street going through the middle of it, and there's our church. This is Google Maps from now, not 1638, but you can see that the church is right in the middle and the public library is across the street. So this is the pond that's most likely, well, here in front of it, that's probably the pond field that Sprague mentions. The words pond field are also, you can see in today's Melrose City Seal. It's called Pond Field. It's the earliest name of this area. And the description also contains the first mention of L Pond, which is our oldest place name still in use in Melrose. And most critically, the listing contains what Bennett calls implicit acknowledgement that this land had belonged to the Massachusetts tribe. Why does Bennett say that? Because he knows that the English could easily tell which plots of land had been cultivated previously, and those are the ones they went for first, because they were obviously prepared by other humans for easy habitation. In this case, Pond Field had been created next to a pond full of fish, like shad and alewife, that regularly migrated up the Mystic by way of L Pond Brook, excuse me. So that's why they think that's Pond Field. We can be by that fairly certain that native people cultivated the land right here where our church sits for thousands of years. Thank you, Bill. You can put the slide down now. Another myth that many of us grew up with was the idea that native people have disappeared from this place, and that is also a lie. Today, more than 5 million people of native descent live in the U.S., and there are about 3,000 people currently in Massachusetts. Most of them are Wampanoag. What is it that we can do to support these people and address our history responsibly? So 2 years ago, I preached on this story here. I told you about Squaw Sachem and our land, and I asked everyone to take a very first step by supporting the Massachusetts Indigenous legislative agenda. That's a group of laws that are proposed by the native people in our state who still live here. You can go to their website, which is maindigenousagenda.org, and you just put in your name and address, and it automatically creates for you emails that you can send to your state representatives on Beacon Hill. It's so easy. The website does all the work for you, and it's free. And within about 30 seconds, you can ask your state reps to support 5 key pieces of legislation that our Native American sisters and brothers have asked us to pass. And they are simple and straightforward. The first is celebrating and teaching Native culture and heritage in our schools, which we currently do not. Second, improving education outcome for Native students, helping them to be sure they graduate. Third is establishing Indigenous Peoples Day as a statewide holiday. Fourth is protecting heritage artifacts and grave sites. And 5 is prohibiting Native American sports teams' mascots, logos, and nicknames in the public schools. If you support these bills, or even some of them, it's very easy to use the website to let the State House know that. This coming Wednesday, the Massachusetts Indigenous agenda is asking people to come and attend a committee hearing on the bill about education. Everyone's invited to show up in person or even just to send a brief email. They would appreciate that. So today, many UU churches and other organizations use land acknowledgements as a way to open conversations about this history. And we have, for 3 or 4 years now, had a land acknowledgement that we show in our announcements every week. But now, there are organizations who are going further, thinking about what are the next steps. What does it mean to take the conversation forward? There are at least 3 congregations in the Boston area that have reparations task forces. They are actively investigating how their congregations and its members profited from the slave trade and how publicly they might surface that history, acknowledge it, and perhaps move toward financial compensation for descendants as a way of repair. And many of these task forces are also looking at reparations for Native Americans and land theft. The First Parish in Brewster on the Cape is actively discussing how it might give back its land and property, or some portion of it, to the Wampanoag people. Now, it's a challenging conversation, and it's one that will take years. But as we discussed last week, reconciliation cannot come cheaply or easily. It's a process of education and empathy, and eventually, maybe, justice. As we can see in the Middle East today, without justice, there can be no peace. And economic justice is always a part of the picture. In this country, we know we cannot address our severe levels of economic inequality with words only. The work of justice demands more than that. In the time of Squaw Sachem, Queen of Massachusetts, at least after the English arrived, it was a world where might made right. The settlers had every unfair advantage, most notably firepower and immunity to the diseases that they brought with them. But unlike the myths that we were taught, the Europeans were not more civilized, more advanced, or even more populous than the natives. In fact, their propensity for war and dominance, you could argue, they were less civilized. Today and tomorrow, as we pause for this holiday, let us remember and honor those who came before us here on this land. Let us honor their wisdom and courage and draw from its strength and wisdom for our own justice making in this time. I'd like us to close today with a favorite hymn. It's based on language from the Bible, but we've realized in recent years that it can sound very colonialist. So we've updated it by changing one word. If you would please join in singing hymn number 121 in the gray hymnal, but instead of "We'll build a land," we're going to sing "We'll build a love." The lyrics will be here on the screen. Please, if you would remain standing and join me in the chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish the flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you for taking part in worship today. After a brief postlude from Tom, we will gather in Parish Hall for refreshments. Please feel free to join us. Folks on Zoom can stay in the room for a brief chat. Happy Sunday, and thank you for worshiping with us.